You know what's funny about wanting something until you actually get it? Sometimes you realize you were asking for all the wrong things. My name is Alara, I'm 28, and I just learned this lesson in the most humiliating way possible. To everyone who knew us, Silas and I had what they called a solid marriage. 3 years in, we had the decent apartment in a respectable part of the city, a joint savings account we dutifully contributed to, and a shared calendar for splitting chores. We were responsible adults, playing our parts perfectly. He worked in warehouse management, a steady paycheck, a reliable schedule. He was as predictable and reassuring as clockwork. I handled client accounts at a downtown financial firm, a job with just enough stress to complain about over dinner. On paper, we weren't just winning at life, we had the high score. In reality, I was dying of boredom. Don't misunderstand me. Silas is genuinely a good guy. The type of man who remembers the anniversary of your first date, not just your wedding. The type who listens, really listens, when you complain about a passive-aggressive email from your coworker, Brenda. He'd nod thoughtfully and say all the right things. But that was precisely the problem. He was safe. He was predictable. He was the human equivalent of beige wallpaper, inoffensive but completely and utterly forgettable. The stability I had once craved when we were younger now felt like a cage I had willingly built around myself. Our life was a flat, unbroken landscape of comfort, and my soul was screaming for a mountain or a canyon, anything to break the monotony. Our bedroom situation was tragic. Silas approached intimacy the same way he approached assembling IKEA furniture, carefully, methodically, with frequent checks of the instructions, in this case, my facial expressions, to ensure everything was proceeding correctly. "Are you comfortable?" he'd ask, his voice earnest and gentle. "Is this okay? Sweet? Sure. Exciting? Not even close." I felt less like a passionate lover and more like a patient undergoing a very considerate, very slow medical examination. I'd try to inject some life into it. I'd hint about trying new things, maybe getting a little adventurous, and he'd get this awkward, flustered look on his face and mumble something about being happy with how things were. He was happy. I was suffocating. My late-night internet searches became my secret escape. I'd scroll through articles while he slept soundly beside me, his breathing a steady, rhythmic pattern. How to rekindle your spark. Couples who dared to change the rules. And then, like a siren's call, the concept of open relationships kept appearing. It was presented as this magical solution, this enlightened path for modern couples. I read the success stories with a feverish intensity, tales of partners who claimed that stepping outside the marriage actually saved it. How experiencing other people makes you appreciate what you have. How it brings back an excitement you thought was gone forever. Those articles, I now realize, conveniently skipped the disaster stories, but honestly, I wasn't looking for those anyway. I was looking for justification, for permission to light a match in my quiet, beige life. I started testing the waters with Silas, a slow, strategic campaign of psychological warfare. I'd make casual comments about how young we still were, how maybe we were settling into old married couple territory a little too early. I'd mention friends of friends who seemed so much more adventurous than us. Silas would nod thoughtfully, that placid, agreeable look on his face, before changing the subject to whether we needed to buy more laundry detergent. That's the thing about Silas. He's a people pleaser, especially with me. My happiness was the central pillar of his world. It took 2 weeks of my strategic conversations, and maybe some well-timed tears about feeling sexually unfulfilled and invisible, to finally crack him. One night, armed with a bottle of wine, we sat at our small dining table and hammered out the rules. It felt less like an intimate marital discussion and more like drafting a business contract. No mutual friends, to keep things clean. No emotional attachments, that was the golden rule. Random hookups didn't require full disclosure, but anything that became a regular occurrence needed transparency. Simple, clean, mature. We were so very mature. "Are you absolutely sure this is what you want, Alara?" Silas asked, his eyes filled with a deep, earnest concern that made me feel a flicker of guilt. "Are you sure this will help us?" "Completely," I said, my voice firm with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "This is going to be good for us. It's going to make us stronger." What I didn't tell him was that my plan wasn't some abstract concept. It had a name, a face, and a cynical smirk that had been occupying my daydreams for months. My random hookup was already chosen. I hadn't just opened a door. I had a specific person I intended to invite inside. His name was Ronan. He worked for a different company but in the same high-rise building, his office 3 floors above mine. For months, we had been caught in this gravitational pull, playing a flirty, unspoken game of cat and mouse. It was in the casual elevator conversations that were never really casual, the lingering eye contact during lunch breaks in the building's sterile cafeteria, the way he'd find excuses to visit my floor to talk to a colleague, his eyes always finding me over the cubicle wall. He gave me the kind of attention that reminded me what being wanted felt like, not just loved in a comfortable domestic way. He was the complete antithesis of Silas. Where Silas was steady and calm, Ronan was a live wire, crackling with a restless, confident energy. He was sharp-witted and ambitious, and he looked at me not like I was someone's wife, but like I was a puzzle he was dying to solve. The week after Silas and I made our agreement, I made my move. I stayed late at the office one night, meticulously planning my departure to accidentally run into him by the elevators as he was leaving. The doors slid open, and there he was. The timing was perfect. "Burning the midnight oil, Alara?" he asked, that familiar smirk playing on his lips. "Something like that," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just trying to get ahead." "All work and no play," he said, shaking his head. "We should grab a drink sometime, decompress." Bet. He'd made the offer before, always casually. This time, I didn't let it pass. "I'm free now," I said. 3 drinks in at a dimly lit cocktail bar downtown, the smooth gin warming my veins, I deployed my carefully rehearsed line. I casually, breezily mentioned that Silas and I, being the progressive, modern couple we were, had recently opened our marriage. Ronan's dark gray eyes, which had been dancing with amusement, suddenly sharpened with a new, intense focus. It was like a hunter hearing a twig snap in a silent forest. The playful energy between us shifted, becoming something more charged, more predatory. It was exactly the reaction I had hoped for. Our first hookup happened during a lunch break the following Tuesday, in an anonymous, hourly rate hotel Ronan knew of. The whole experience felt like a scene from a movie: the clandestine meeting, the sterile room, the thrill of the forbidden. It was everything my marriage was not: passionate, spontaneous, urgent, and deliciously dangerous. Ronan knew exactly what he wanted and wasn't afraid to take it. There were no hesitant questions about my comfort, only the raw, undeniable force of his desire. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely, thrillingly alive. The change in me was immediate. Silas noticed it the moment I walked through the door that evening. I was practically vibrating with a giddy, nervous energy. I initiated sex for the first time in weeks, my body still humming with the memory of the afternoon. I was happier, more energetic, more engaged. When he asked what had changed, a hopeful, gentle smile on his face, I just smiled back and said, "The new arrangement, it's working." He seemed genuinely pleased that I was happy, a fact that filled me with a strange cocktail of guilt and vindication. I was lying to him, not about the act, but about the emotions behind it, yet that lie seemed to be making him happy too. It felt like a win-win. About a month into my bi-weekly lunches with Ronan, Silas tentatively brought up his own progress. He mentioned he'd been chatting with a few women on some dating apps. "Nothing serious yet," he said, looking more curious than excited. "Just testing the waters, like you said." A weird, possessive ping of jealousy shot through me. It was utterly ridiculous. Here I was, sneaking around with Ronan, living out this double life, and I was irritated by the thought of my husband doing the very thing I had pushed him into. I quickly squashed the feeling, reminding myself this was part of the deal. "I'm happy for you," I told him, forcing a bright, supportive tone. "You deserve to have some fun." But a small, ugly part of me didn't mean it. I wanted the freedom for myself, but I still wanted the security of being the center of his world. My routine with Ronan became the new rhythm of my life. Tuesdays and Thursdays were sacred, carved out of my workday for illicit, passionate encounters. Sometimes, we'd meet for drinks after work on the nights Silas had a date of his own. Ronan was my exciting secret, my escape from the beige landscape of my marriage. He made me feel beautiful and desired, not just comfortable and familiar. The first time Silas actually hooked up with someone, he came home, different. It wasn't one big, obvious change, but a collection of tiny, almost imperceptible shifts. There was the faint scent of a different perfume on his shirt, something light and floral that wasn't mine. There was a lightness in his step that I hadn't seen in ages, a subtle confidence in the way he carried himself. How did it go? I asked, trying to sound like the cool, unfazed wife I was pretending to be. He just offered me a small, private smile that didn't quite meet my eyes. Good, he said, and then immediately changed the subject, asking if I'd remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. That one-word, closed-door answer bothered me more than a detailed confession would have. Before this experiment, our lives were an open book. Now, he was starting to write chapters he wasn't sharing with me. But I had Ronan, so I told myself it didn't matter. Silas could have his little adventures. I was getting exactly what I wanted. The stability of my marriage with the excitement of an affair. It was the perfect system. Except the system was beginning to break down. The neat compartments I had built in my mind started to bleed into one another. Ronan, who was supposed to be a simple, physical escape, began to push for more. He started suggesting dinner after our hotel visits, real dates, not just hurried, clandestine meetings. He started texting me on the weekends, asking about my day, sharing little anecdotes from his. It began to feel less like a fling and more like I was cultivating a secret boyfriend. After years of feeling taken for granted in my marriage, his constant attention was a potent drug, and I was becoming a willing addict. At the same time, the foundation of my life, my predictable, steady Silas, was slowly transforming into someone I barely recognized. Someone more confident, more mysterious, more interesting. He was becoming everything I had secretly wished he would be, but I had the chilling realization that he wasn't doing it for me. The changes started small. I came home one evening to find a sleek, black rowing machine assembled in the corner of our living room. Silas, who had always been content with his comfortable, slightly soft physique, was suddenly interested in fitness. He started buying new clothes that actually fit him well, trading his faded college hoodies for crisp button-downs and well-cut jeans. He started going out more often, not just on dates, but with his own friends, staying out later, and coming home with a vibrant energy that had long since faded from our life together. This was supposed to make me happy. This was the whole point of our arrangement, wasn't it? To become better, more exciting versions of ourselves. Instead, it made me feel deeply and profoundly unsettled. It was like watching a stranger walking around in my husband's body. The quiet, predictable man I had so easily dismissed was vanishing, and in his place was someone I didn't know how to read, how to please, or how to control. The invisible cracks were starting to appear in my perfect, manufactured world. According to our meticulously crafted rules, I had to disclose the fact that my relationship with Ronan had become a regular, ongoing thing. One night, over a dinner I had barely touched, I decided it was time to perform my role as the honest, transparent partner. So, I began pushing a piece of broccoli around my plate. I've been seeing someone regularly, someone I really like. Silas looked up, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. I braced myself for something. Jealousy? Hurt? Anxiety? I got nothing. His expression was calm, almost placid. That's good, Alara, he said. I'm glad you're happy. His serene acceptance was infuriating. I wanted a reaction. I wanted him to be a little threatened, to show some sign that he was afraid of losing me. His name is Ronan, I pushed on, watching his face for any flicker of emotion. We work in the same building, he's really great. Silas just nodded thoughtfully. He then proceeded to ask a series of polite, responsible questions. How long had we been seeing each other? Was Ronan a good guy? Did I feel safe with him? He was acting less like a husband and more like a concerned older brother. It drove me insane. What about you? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Any of your dates turning serious? And that's when I saw it. A small, secret smile played on his lips. It was a gentle, genuine curving of his mouth that I hadn't seen in years. It was the smile he used to give me, back at the beginning, when he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Actually, yeah, he said, his eyes softening in a way that made my stomach clench. There's this woman, Sloane. We've been seeing each other for a few weeks now. She's really something. The way his whole face lit up when he said her name, Sloane, felt like a physical blow. A hot, acidic jealousy twisted in my gut. I didn't want to examine the feeling too closely, but it was there, undeniable and ugly. Tell me about her, I said, forcing my voice into a register of casual, friendly interest. Silas just shrugged, a newfound coyness in his posture. You'll meet her eventually, we're taking things slow. Taking things slow. Meanwhile, he'd already met Ronan, who had awkwardly picked me up from our apartment one evening for a work event. At least I was being transparent. Silas was keeping his new woman hidden away like a precious secret, and the hypocrisy of it all grated on me. The changes in Silas accelerated. He became more decisive, more self-assured. My old tricks for getting his attention, passive-aggressive comments about dishes left in the sink or a bill that needed paying, no longer worked. He would just handle the task silently, without the lengthy, apologetic discussion I had grown accustomed to. He started having his own opinions about movies and restaurants, making weekend plans that didn't automatically revolve around me. My distraction became obvious to Ronan. "Is everything okay at home?" he asked one afternoon, his hand tracing lazy circles on my bare back in our hotel room. "Is your husband giving you a hard time?" "Everything's fine," I lied, but it wasn't. The problem wasn't that Silas was giving me a hard time, it was that he wasn't giving me anything at all. He was physically present but emotionally absent, a polite roommate who shared my bed. And the cruelest irony was that this new Silas, this confident, mysterious man with a life of his own, was incredibly attractive. He was everything I had complained to my girlfriends that I was missing. He was everything I had wished for. And now, he was becoming that person for someone else. My anxiety curdled into a low-grade paranoia. I started paying obsessive attention to his schedule, his moods, his phone habits. The man who once left his phone lying around, face up and unlocked, now kept it permanently face down. He would smile at texts he didn't share. He took it into the bathroom with him. When I asked about Sloane again, he would deflect, saying they were still figuring things out, that he didn't want to jinx anything. But his whole demeanor would soften when he spoke of her, as if just the thought of her was something wonderful. At the same time, Ronan was pushing for more commitment, more of me. "You know, this can't go on forever, Alara," he said one afternoon, his voice serious. The usual post-coital languor was gone, replaced by a tense energy. "Eventually, you're going to have to choose." "Choose what?" I asked, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "Whether you want a real relationship with a future, or you're content to be someone's part-time girlfriend forever." For the first time since I had embarked on this reckless adventure, a sliver of genuine fear pierced through my carefully constructed facade. I had been so focused on what I was gaining, the excitement, the passion, that I had never truly stopped to consider what I stood to lose. What I had with Ronan was a thrilling escape, but it was built on a foundation of lies. What I had with Silas was supposed to be my stable ground, but it was crumbling beneath my feet day by day. I had wanted everything, and I was suddenly terrified that I was about to end up with nothing at all. Month 4 brought the ultimatum I had been simultaneously dreading and, on some deeply masochistic level, fantasizing about. Ronan had been dropping hints for weeks about his company's expansion and opportunities in other cities. I had dismissed it as idle chatter, the kind of vague, future-tense dreaming that felt safe because it wasn't real. Then he made it real. "My company is opening a new branch in Dallas," he said one afternoon in our usual hotel room. The city hummed outside the window, a world away from the bubble we were in. "They want me to go down there and head the transition team." My stomach plunged. "When?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Next month." He propped himself up on an elbow, his dark, intense eyes searching mine. "It's a huge opportunity, Alara. Regional manager, a big salary bump, the whole package." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "I want you to come with me." I stared at the water-stained ceiling, the words echoing in my head. Come with me. It was the grand, sweeping, romantic gesture from the movies. The kind of thing I had always secretly craved. "Ronan, I'm married," I said, the words feeling flimsy and pathetic even as I spoke them. "I can't just pack up and move to Dallas." "Why not?" he pressed, his voice gentle but firm. "What's really keeping you here? A husband who treats you like a roommate? A marriage that's practically a business arrangement? We could have something real, Alara. No more sneaking around, no more stolen hours. Just us, building a real life together." The offer was a potent, terrifying cocktail. On one hand, it was a blank slate. In Dallas, I could be someone new, the passionate, adventurous woman I pretended to be with Ronan. But then, the practicalities crashed down on me: the joint bank account, the co-signed lease, the 3 years of financial and social entanglement with Silas. Starting over from scratch at 28 felt both exhilarating and cataclysmic. "I need time to think," I told him. It was the worst possible thing I could have said. I saw his expression shudder, his jaw tighten. "Time to think about what?" he shot back, his voice losing its gentle edge. Whether you want a shot at actual happiness, or if you'd rather stay stuck in your dead-end marriage? He sat up, pulling away from me, the warmth of his body leaving a cold spot on the sheets. You know what I think? I think you love having your options. You get me as your exciting little secret, while you keep your husband as your safety net. But I'm not interested in being your backup plan anymore, Alara. The accusation was a physical blow because it was so brutally, shamefully true. Silas was my safety net. Ronan was my adventure. He gave me an ultimatum: 2 weeks. Either I commit to a new life with him in Dallas, or I stay in my pretend marriage and he walks away for good. Those 2 weeks passed in a strange, surreal limbo. Ronan was still available, but distant. Our remaining encounters felt less like passionate trysts and more like a long, sad goodbye. At home, Silas was more present than he'd been in months, but in a polite, detached way that made me feel like a stranger in my own life. He talked about Sloane more openly now, sharing little stories about their dates, their conversations, the things they had in common. She worked in healthcare. She loved to hike. She read the same obscure history books he did. She sounded perfect for him. In ways I had never been and never cared to be, each anecdote was another small twist of the knife in my gut. The night before Ronan's deadline, Silas came home from another date with Sloane. He was practically glowing. He was humming to himself as he changed his clothes, smiling at a text on his phone, moving through our shared apartment as if his feet weren't quite touching the ground. He was radiating a pure, unadulterated joy. Good date? I asked, my voice tight. Really good, he said, and the smile he gave me wasn't for me, but it lit up the entire room. And in that moment, I knew my answer. I couldn't go to Dallas. My decision had nothing to do with wanting to save my marriage or any lingering love for Silas. It was a purely selfish, possessive impulse. I could not bear to watch him be this happy, knowing with absolute, crushing certainty that I would never again be the source of that happiness. If I couldn't have him, no one could. Or at least, I had to stay and fight to reclaim my position as the center of his universe. I told Ronan the next morning that I was staying. He called me a coward. He said I was wasting my life and that I would regret choosing a hollow security over a chance at real passion. He was probably right, but I decided I would rather regret staying than regret running away from the mess I had so carefully, so stupidly, created. He left for Dallas without so much as a goodbye text. And just like that, I was alone. Alone with my husband and the ghost of the man he used to be. Ronan's departure left a gaping void in my life that I was completely unprepared for. For months, he had been the exciting, vibrant center of my world, the sun around which my secret life orbited. Without him, the color drained away, leaving me with the stark, gray reality of my marriage. I was no longer the desired, adventurous lover. I was just Alara again, the wife of a man who had become a stranger. Silas seemed utterly indifferent to Ronan's absence. When I mentioned, with forced casualty, that my friend from work had been transferred to Dallas, he just nodded while scrolling through his phone. That must be hard, he said, his tone one of polite disinterest. There were no follow-up questions, no flicker of curiosity, no recognition that someone who had occupied so much of my time and energy had simply vanished. It was as if Ronan had never existed. Meanwhile, his relationship with Sloane was clearly escalating from serious to permanent. He was going out 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, staying out later and later. Sometimes, he wouldn't come home until morning, offering a flimsy, insulting excuse about falling asleep at a friend's place after a late night. The old Silas had been a terrible liar, his guilt written all over his face. This new, confident Silas was no better at the craft of deception, but he delivered his lies with a chilling lack of concern. He didn't care if I believed him or not. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home. He would come home from a date, reeking faintly of Sloane's perfume, and barely acknowledge my presence on the couch. He would shower, change, grab a yogurt from the fridge, and then disappear into the bedroom with his phone, the door closing softly behind him. The man who used to crave every mundane detail of my day couldn't even be bothered to ask how work was. One night, I finally broke. He was getting ready for yet another date with Sloane, humming to himself as he selected a shirt from the closet, checking his reflection with the focused, pre-date jitters of a teenager. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest like a shield. He glanced at my reflection in the mirror. "Can it wait? I'm supposed to meet Sloane in an hour." It's about us, I said, my voice shaking slightly. It's about our marriage. That finally got his full attention. He turned around, and for a heartbreaking second, I saw the old Silas, his face etched with concern, attentive, ready to drop everything if I was in distress. What's wrong? I took a deep, steadying breath. I want to close the marriage, I announced, the words hanging in the air between us. I want to go back to it just being us. I watched his face, expecting a wave of relief, of surprise, maybe even happiness that his wandering wife was finally ready to come home. Instead, his expression morphed into one of confusion, discomfort, and something that looked terrifyingly like panic. Close it? He repeated, as if he didn't understand the words. Why? Because this isn't working. The frustration I'd been bottling up for weeks came pouring out. We barely talk. We're like strangers living in the same apartment. I miss what we used to have. Silas sat down heavily on the edge of our bed, running a hand through his hair. Alara, this was your idea, he said, his voice flat. You were the one who wanted this arrangement. I know, but things have changed. Ronan's gone. And I've realized that what I really want, what I've always wanted, is to focus on us again. Oh, Ronan's gone, he repeated slowly, and the words were dripping with a cynicism I had never heard from him before. So, now that your outside relationship has ended, you want me to end mine? The way he framed it made me sound so selfish, so manipulative. It made me sound like exactly what I was. It's not about Ronan, I insisted, lying to both him and myself. It's about getting back to what really matters. What really matters, he said, and an edge I had never heard before entered his voice. It was sharp and cold and hard. Alara, you spent months barely looking at me unless you needed a bill paid or a leaky faucet fixed. You turned our marriage into a business contract so you could go have fun with your coworker. And now that he's moved away, you expect me to just give up the first real happiness I've felt in years? Real happiness? The words were a punch to the gut. You're happy with her. End of 2. His face softened, just a fraction. Yeah, Alara, I am. Sloane. She makes me feel like myself again, like the person I was before I spent all my energy trying so hard to be whatever it was you wanted me to be. I never asked you to be anything other than yourself. You didn't have to ask, he said, his voice quiet but devastating. You made it perfectly clear, in 1,000 different ways, that myself wasn't enough. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. I'm not ready to close this, Alara. I'm not ready to give up what I've found with her. Panic, cold and sharp, rose in my chest. So, what does that mean for us? He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. I don't know, he said. And the honest uncertainty in his voice was more terrifying than any fight we'd ever had. But I'm finally happy, and I'm not going to apologize for that. He left for his date, the door clicking shut behind him, and I sat on the edge of our bed, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. It was a strange, hollow, and deeply unfamiliar feeling. I had just been dumped, not by my lover, but by my husband. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in desperation. I tried everything to win him back, to rekindle the dying ember of our marriage. I cooked his favorite meals, I suggested we go to the places we used to love, I even bought the kind of lingerie Ronan had liked, hoping it might spark something in Silas. Nothing worked. He was polite but distant, present but unavailable. Trying to connect with him was like trying to catch smoke. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I cornered him when he came home from another late night with Sloane. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. I need you to choose, Silas, I said, my voice shaking with a toxic cocktail of anger and fear. You need to decide what's more important. Your marriage or your girlfriend. He stopped in the middle of taking off his jacket and looked at me for a long moment. There was no anger in his eyes, just a profound, weary sadness. That's not fair, Alara. What's not fair, I shot back, is watching my husband fall in love with someone else and being expected to just smile and support it. You wanted this, he said, and his voice was harder than I had ever heard it. You pushed for this arrangement. You set the rules. And now that things aren't going your way, you want to burn the whole game board down. I want my husband back. That person doesn't exist anymore, Alara, he said, his voice softening into something worse than anger, pity. I can't go back to being the guy who centers his entire world around making you happy while you're looking elsewhere for excitement. I won't do it. Then he did something that shattered the last of my illusions. He walked calmly over to our dresser and began pulling out his clothes, t-shirts, sweaters, socks, folding them with a methodical precision, and placing them into a duffel bag. There was no drama, no shouting, no slamming drawers. It was just a quiet, systematic dismantling of our life together. "Where are you going?" I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while," he said, not looking at me, "to give us both some space to figure out what we actually want." He paused at the bedroom door, bag in hand. "Maybe we can work this out. But not like this. Not with you trying to control the situation just because you don't like how it turned out for you." That was 3 weeks ago. He left that night and never came back to stay. 2 weeks after he walked out, a courier delivered a thick manila envelope to my desk at work. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were divorce papers. He had filed for dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. The legal jargon was cold and brutal. The papers included a letter from his lawyer explaining that Mr. Thornton wished for the process to move as quickly as possible. The final sentence made the air in my lungs turn to ice. He is planning to remarry within the year and wishes to start his new life without any outstanding legal complications. Remarry. Within the year. The words pulsed in my head. The divorce was swift and strangely civil, a testament to Silas's unwavering fairness. He let me keep most of the furniture. He didn't fight me on the apartment. He even offered to pay half of my legal fees. He was extricating himself from my life with a quiet, efficient grace that was somehow more painful than any fight would have been. We met one last time to sign the final papers, in a sterile, impersonal conference room. Seeing him was a shock. He was tan, his hair was styled differently, and he wore a tailored blazer that made him look confident and successful. When he smiled at his lawyer, it was the genuine, easy smile I remembered from our first few dates, a smile I hadn't been the cause of in years. "You look good, Silas," I said, the words feeling hollow. "Thanks," he replied, his gaze polite but distant. "I feel good." He didn't return the compliment. A desperate, foolish question tumbled out of me. "Are you happy?" He considered it for a moment, with that same serious thoughtfulness he had always possessed. "Yeah, Alara," he said, his voice free of malice or gloating. It was simply a statement of fact. "I really am. For the first time in a long time, I am exactly where I want to be, with exactly who I want to be with." 6 months later, the wedding announcement appeared on my social media feed. A mutual acquaintance had shared it. It was a photo of Silas and Sloane, standing under a canopy of trees, bathed in golden afternoon light. They were married. In the pictures that followed, they were laughing, dancing, looking at each other with an expression of such profound, grateful love. It made my chest ache. Silas looked like the happiest man alive. And Sloane looked like a woman who deserved him. They looked real. They looked solid. I closed the laptop and looked around my empty apartment, the same apartment where I had sat and plotted this entire disaster, all because I wanted something more exciting. The rent was far too expensive for one person now, but I couldn't bring myself to move. It felt like admitting utter and complete defeat. Ronan had stopped answering my texts months ago. I'd heard he was happy in Dallas, with someone new, someone without the baggage of a fresh divorce. I was 30 now, single, standing in the wreckage of a life I had so carelessly dismantled. And I finally understood. I had wanted excitement, passion, and endless options. I got all of those things, for a little while. What I deserved was this: the profound, crushing loneliness of losing the one person who had truly and unconditionally loved me, all because I was too busy looking for something better. They say the house always wins. I just never realized I was betting against myself the whole time.